Hey everyone, over the last few decades, the way we pay for things when we're checking out at a store has evolved dramatically several times over. We've gone from just using cash to the occasional traveler's check to that period in time where everyone carried a checkbook with them, and now ultimately ending up in the credit and debit card world that we live in today, where you don't have to carry anything except the swipe or tap of a card in order to buy things at most stores in the country. But later this year, the way we pay for things once again is going to change dramatically. And throughout this evolution of how we pay for things, from cash, or even before cash when you bartered physical goods, to cash, then to checks, and then ultimately to cards where we are today, there has been one common thread linking every single step of the way to the next one. And that is that the amount of physical stuff you have to carry to check out continues to go down. When you bartered for goods, you had to have goods with you in order to check out. When you brought cash, you had to have enough cash for whatever it was you chose to purchase. Then checkbooks enabled us to just bring one single checkbook, and you could write a check regardless of the price of what you were carrying. You didn't have to carry that much cash. And now when it comes to cards, it doesn't matter what you're purchasing, you only need to carry one card. You don't have to carry an entire checkbook. But the problem is that unlike checkbooks and unlike cash, each card comes with different benefits. And so those of us who are into credit cards, and even those of us who aren't so into credit cards, we're used to carrying more than one credit card with us at a time. And some of us can carry a handful, if not several handfuls of credit cards with us at a time. And once you add that to your wallet with your IDs and a little bit of cash, because some places don't take card, and you end up being left with this massive thick wallet that's a pain in your pocket, that's difficult to navigate, and that ultimately ends up inconveniencing you almost as much as it ends up conveniencing you. And so the problem of the thick wallet is a minor annoyance in life that you'd think modern technology would have a way to solve so far. And it turns out that lots of companies have tried to solve the problem of the thick wallet with software, with hardware, and none of them have been able to nail it yet. And you still have people walking around, rightfully so, because they have a real purpose for it, with thick wallets. And on top of the problem of just having thick wallets, when you carry a lot of cards, it's hard for people to determine which credit card to use depending on which store they're at. You've had people put sticky notes on cards. You've had people lecture their spouses on which card to use in which situation, and it's confusing. It's not convenient, and ultimately causes way more trouble than a checkbook ever caused. And so to solve the problem of the thick wallet and of carrying too many cards and managing that, you've had different software and hardware solutions come to the market, and none of them have been able to solve it properly until now. And so we're going to talk about the 4 different methods that have been tried, including the last one, which is about to be tried, and why this one might change the credit card game forever. And if you stick around, you'll hear why it might not be all the roses that it sounds like, and it might actually be terrible for credit cards in the long run. And method number 1 is the simple hardware option, which is just make a slimmer wallet. And you've had people make these slim, flimsy wallets, but those can't fit enough cards. And then you've also seen people try to give you access to lots of cards without needing much physical space. If you've seen those wallets that have kind of the slider at the bottom and then all the cards inside pop up. And the advantage of those wallets is that regardless of how many cards you have in there, it's always the same thickness. But that means the default is just always thick. And that also means that you can't have a wallet with such high capacity without having a really, really thick wallet, especially because those metal frames and those metal cases are much thicker than even your typical leather, and especially your slimmer wallets. And then with those sliding gear wallets, you have another problem. If you're always picking a different card, right, it's actually harder and an inconvenience to figure out which card to ultimately pay with, and without knocking over the rest of the cards. And so slimmer wallets and different wallet designs have been one way that people have tried to solve the problem of thick wallets, but it hasn't yet really taken over. Some people like it, but it's not a perfect solution by any means. So let's go on to method number 2. Method number 2, which is better than method number 1, is the software approach. Instead of making a thinner wallet via hardware, why don't you just make a wallet on your phone? A wallet app. So you have Apple Pay and Google Pay, but the problem with Apple and Google Pay and these mobile wallets is twofold. Number 1 is that lots of people don't trust these massive companies that already have so much of their data, like Apple and Google, for example, to actually store all of their credit card information. But the second problem with these mobile wallets is the fact that you still have to decide which credit card you're going to use whenever you check out at a certain place. It's still an inconvenience. And so that brings us to method number 3. And method number 3 that people have used to try to solve this problem of thick wallets, the problems that come with carrying so many cards at once, like which card do I use at which place? There have been lots of startups that tried to fix this. And so the first startup that really gained notoriety trying to fix this was a Kickstarter project called Coin. And back in 2014, Coin launched an electronic all-in-one credit card, where you could have all of your credit card information stored on one card and click a little button to cycle through whichever card would be triggered next time you paid with that card. And until it got sent out, people were obsessed with it. But therein lies the problem. Once it got sent out to people, it turns out it only worked about half the time. And so while half the time you would think it's great, really the half the time it worked, you hated it because you were so nervous the entire time. Oh, am I going to have the embarrassment and inconvenience of having my card declined? So even the 50% of the time it worked for many customers, it was still not a pleasant experience until ultimately the Coin card didn't work. But following in Coin's footsteps is another startup. This one's called Curve, or the Curve card. And what Curve is doing is they issue a single card, and they say that if you upload all of your cards to your Curve account, then when you check out at that one card, it will automatically apply the best card based on the earnings you'll get from each of your cards. The problem with the Curve card, however, is that the way they do this, albeit very clever, is very jerry-rigged and doesn't really work most of the time. See, the way they do this is they have their own set of merchant codes, and these merchant codes are the way that credit card issuers like Chase and American Express know which type of place you're shopping at, because then they're able to categorize it based on the category of the merchant code and figure out how much cash back to give you. So what Curve did was they basically set up their own merchant codes in every major category, and whenever you check out with your Curve card, they see the merchant code that your Curve card was charged, and then they use the Curve merchant code. Say, for example, if you're at a restaurant, they'll have a Curve restaurant per se, a Curve restaurant code, and they'll just bill an identical charge from Curve's restaurant to your credit card, right? And so the way that works basically is they're tricking your credit card into thinking it was used at a restaurant, but really Curve just charged your credit card for a transaction that Curve just paid for on their own, basically. And then you're reimbursing Curve. The problem here is that Curve is operating within different payment networks. So if you have a Visa card, for example, connected to your Curve account, and you use your Curve card to check out at a restaurant, now, when Curve has to reimburse itself via your Chase card, Curve is technically the merchant there, and so Curve now has to pay the credit card processing fee, which could be around 2.7% and 30 cents for the transaction, just to be able to facilitate that transaction for you. And so they have to be making that money somehow, and Curve is probably making some money on collecting the swipe fee when you check out at the restaurant, but they're paying that and more just to process the transaction they charged to your original card. So they're losing money on every transaction unless one of two things happens. Number one, they could have a deal with the payment network, like they could make a private deal with Visa, for example, to just waive the fees on their reimbursement charges, which is when they charge your best card for that transaction and for the charge that you just put on your Curve card. But the odds that that's happened are very unlikely. And actually, Amex has gone one step further than that and has actually banned the Curve merchant codes from being used at all with Amex cards, so you just can't use it with Amex. And it's also very hard to get in the US and very buggy in the US, but that's besides the point. Ignoring the bugs, you have a math problem, which is that they just can't afford to do it without charging you an exorbitant fee. They charge a flat monthly fee, and this monthly fee can be pretty high just to be able to use this feature of having it automatically route your purchases to get you the best cash back for each category. So while in theory, the Curve card would be the best solution to this problem of carrying around so many cards and having a thick wallet that we've spoken about so far, it just doesn't work without them having to charge you exorbitant fees. And that's if they can get it to work at all, which they haven't proven to be able to do yet in the US. And then you have this large graveyard of startups, including my own, before we started working on Pointwise, quick shameless plug here, what we ultimately settled on doing is building this app where you can connect your preferences and your existing credit cards and debit cards so that our algorithm can match that to the benefits and multipliers of almost every card that's out there. And then we're able to tell you with certainty what the best credit card for you is based on your spending patterns, but not just today, not just a one-time recommendation. We guide you on your credit card journey over time, optimizing for your preferences to keep your credit score high and ultimately to make sure that you get the most points long term and that you follow every weird rule that different credit card issuers have so that you never have to think about which credit card to get ever again or when to get it. And we're about to launch that in the next couple of weeks. So if you want to be the first to know, I'll put the link down to our waitlist at getpointwise.com down in the description below, and it will be totally free. Now, going back to what I was saying, there's a large graveyard of startups, including my own before we ended up ultimately settling on Pointwise, where we tried, as have so many others, to create an Apple or Google Pay competitor where it just auto routes the transaction to the proper card and it would know which info to give when you tap your card based on your location data to be able to actually see which stores are nearby you and guess with a pretty high degree of certainty where you are, and so that would determine which card to use. The problem is that Apple and Google have monopolies on the NFC chip in your phone, which is the part of your phone that enables that tap to pay feature to work. And so because they have a monopoly on that, startups can't really build successfully in that space. It's almost impossible. But finally, it looks like this problem might actually have a solution that's on the cusp of solving it once and for all. And if you think about the problems from the first few methods that we've been talking about here, it becomes pretty obvious what this next step is going to be and why this next method has a really high chance of working. The problem with method number one, which is just redesigning the physical wallet, is that you still have a physical wallet, which has physical size constraints if you want to have a lot of cards, and you still have the confusion factor of not knowing which card to use at which store. So methods 2 and 3 solve the physical location problem, right? Method number 2 is the mobile wallets. And methods number 3 are the curve and coin-esque startups that we spoke about. So those solve the problem of only having to carry one phone or one card, but they have reliability issues, they don't really work, or they're too expensive and have to charge crazy high monthly fees, or they're just impossible to build because you can't really build so much on top of Apple or Google Pay. But the closest these solutions have come to working is obviously the all-in-one card. Like the dream scenario here is just having one of these all-in-one cards like a curve or like a coin, probably more like curve, where you can actually just check out with one card and it applies whatever card you want for the transaction on the back end. And so obviously the only people that can make this work are the payment networks themselves. And finally, after over a decade of startups launching and dying because they couldn't figure out how to do this without having the payment processors on board, Visa has realized they can and should just do this themselves, and it will be great for their business. See, Visa just had their annual payments forum in San Francisco this past Wednesday, and they unveiled what they say themselves is going to change the way credit cards work forever. What they announced is something called the Visa Flexible Credential, which is one card or one credential, and that card will have stored on it all of your Visa cards from any bank that's out there. And it doesn't just have to be credit cards, you can have debit cards on it as well. They also flirted the ability to set rules, such as any purchase under $100 is going to be charged to your debit card, and any purchase over $100 would be charged to a credit card. The logical conclusion from that is that eventually, perhaps you'll be able to set your own rules, such as which categories are charged to which cards. Now, this isn't perfect by any means. You might still have to have one card for Visa, one card for Discover, which now includes Capital One probably, one card for Amex, and maybe one card for MasterCard. But at most, that's 4 cards. And 4 cards is not nearly as confusing as 6 cards or 7 cards. It turns out that the brain can realistically keep track of a small number of things pretty well. But just going 1 or 2 above that makes everything so much more confusing. And maybe in a dream world, there will be a point where the credit card networks are able to come together and create one flexible credential that works with all of them. And then there's another big problem here, which is that I don't know that the banks would want them to let you set up your custom rules. Because the way the banks make money on these credit cards is by you getting the credit card for some reason and then using it in suboptimal ways. I'll give you an example. If you get your Chase Freedom Flex card that gives you 5% back on rotating categories every month, if you only use that card to get the sign-up bonus, and then after that you only use it to get your 5x back depending on the quarter, you are not a profitable customer for Chase, assuming you pay off your card in full each month. Because Chase, except in cases where they have a deal with the specific store where they're offering 5% back on, they only get the same swipe fee of less than 3% every time you shop. So if they're paying you 5%, that costs them more than what you earned them on that transaction. A lot of these cards have branding to them also. There are lots of people who use the Amex Platinum because they feel like it's an exclusive, luxurious card, not because it's actually the best card for them to be using on that transaction. And those people are not going to be able to do that if everything's on one card. So the upside here is that for credit card enthusiasts, for people that are so interested in maximizing their credit cards and just having that all automated for them, well, at Pointwise, we're just automating which cards to get and when, so you never have to focus about that. This Visa credential would actually automate which card to use at checkout because you would just have one card for all of your Visa cards. But the drawbacks are, I don't know how flexible the banks like Chase, for example, are going to let Visa be with the customization options for these rules, because that risks making so many of these cards unprofitable for Chase. And so either they're going to stop Visa from making it so customizable such that you can say this category goes to this card, or they're just going to make the cards less competitive so that you could do that and they still wouldn't lose any money. But on the other hand, the banks depend on this opportunity existing because this is how they get customers, this is how they differentiate themselves. And so there are a lot of different moving pieces to this, and there's a way in which this turns out really good for the credit card world and for consumers, and there's a way in which this ends up killing the whole thing because it makes it no longer profitable anymore for banks to offer such profitable credit cards. And regardless of what happens, I think it's great for consumers that even big companies like Visa are still trying to innovate. And I don't know about you, but I'm excited to see where it goes. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to be the first to know about Pointwise when we go live, which is going to be in the next couple of weeks, the link to sign up to our waitlist is down below in the description, or you can find it yourself at getpointwise.com.